Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whenever you are. Welcome to this webinar with Dr. Myong Hyun, who is a guest researcher and senior fellow, and is visiting us from South Korea. Welcome, Dr. Go. My name is thank you. My name is Josephine Argo Rasmussen, and I'm a project coordinator and junior fellow at the Korea Center at ISDP. Today, with Dr. Go, we're going to look more into the evolving nature of hybrid threats and the challenges that pose to regional stability. We're going to look into more in cyberspace and this new idea of gray zone warfare in cyberspace and so forth. Dr. Go is currently a senior fellow and director of the Hybrid Threats Research Center at the Institute for National Security Strategy. So we have an expert among us. So thank you so much for taking your time and for joining us today.
No, thank you so much for your opportunity. And then I'm really happy to be in Sweden at ISDP. And also I would like to thank ISDP for hosting me here in general in Sweden. Nonetheless, I loved being here. And then I think it was a great time for me to look into the hybrid threats in Asia, but Northeast Asia, from the vantage point of Europe. And I think, in fact, I think there's a lot of commonalities between the two regions, even though this time around I'll be mostly introducing to the audience about the current state of hybrid threats in Northeast Asia. I think the regional difference is very important, so I wanted to highlight that. So without much further ado, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just going to say a little bit that the participants can, during the webinar, of course, send questions in our Q&A. And in the last 15 minutes of this lecture, we will answer your questions and have a discussion here. But otherwise, like you said, no further ado, let's get to the lecture.
Perfect, thank you. So
we have a PowerPoint coming up for you guys.
So I prepared a PowerPoint so that
it's perfect.
So I'm unable to think without a PowerPoint. I'm sorry to say this, not to use it. So yeah. So I think, I want to go directly into the hybrid threats in Northeast Asia. And I want to say Northeast Asia rather than just in the Pacific region. And the reason is very clear. I think the overall landscape or threat landscape in the region in Northeast Asia is quite different from, let's say, what's going on in South China Sea. So we know the major actor or threatening actor in those two regions, Northeast Asia and South China Sea, is China. But nonetheless, the behavior that China shows, the threat behavior that China displays across these two regions are quite different. So, for instance, in Northeast Asia, there's a clearly less emphasis on territorial disputes. In fact, there's next to no territorial dispute involving China and Korea, for instance. Of course, there's one between China and Japan, that's the Senkaku Islands. But then, except for the exception, also Taiwan. So Taiwan is in this gray area, no gray zone, but gray area. We don't know exactly how to classify Taiwan. It's one of convenience. So when we want simplicity, then we exclude Taiwan. But then if you want something more in-depth and complicated, we include Taiwan in the region. But for now, for this presentation at least, I'll exclude Taiwan from the Northeast Asian region. No offense to any Taiwanese friends listening me right now, but that's for the sake of simplicity. So I want to illustrate how China behaves to countries other than Taiwan or South Asian countries, namely Korea and Japan. And again, it's really more about, less about the territorial disputes that also, unlike what you observe elsewhere in Asia. And the reason I think it's because of the strong military deterrence that's present in the region. So if you compare South China Sea to Northeast Asia is characterized by very strong alliances between Korea and the United States and Japan and the United States. And now we have a very strong trilateral cooperation between Korea, Japan, and the United States. And also Korea and Japan are by themselves very strong military powers. They count very strong conventional capabilities, also cyber capabilities. And even Japan, which already had subscribed to a very pacifist stance when it comes to conflicts, now has become more active, but at least when it comes to cyber domain. So that shows, I think, deterrence is working in Northeast Asia. And then I think that really, in a way, limits China's options when it comes to hybrid threats. And I think that this is the reason why China is more focused on information warfare in Northeast Asia against Korea and Japan, and perhaps the United States to, if you want to go beyond that. Not because China, the territorial issues have been settled. It's more because China's options have been limited by the military deterrence that I just talked about. And I think the Chinese can realize by, looking at the region and the regional players that there are asymmetries and vulnerabilities that they can exploit. So for instance, we're talking about open societies versus closed societies. We have Korea, Japan, and the United States on one hand, which are open democratic societies against the authoritarian regimes of China, Russia, and North Korea. Clearly, China, Russia, and North Korea, they're not the same level of authoritarian regimes, but nonetheless, they are friends. So you can see there are some political similarities across the world. So, and then I think the Chinese understand that they can exploit this vulnerability. So asymmetries for strategic gains. So for instance, we have the Chinese employment of, they do engage in malicious interference, but then again, in Northeast Asia, that's more subtle. And I'm not going to talk about in details about the last point about the geopolitical risks to data security. I'm referring to the undersea cables. But then that's also another issue because if you look at the map of Asia, China is a really, really huge, geographically speaking, I would say no player, but then a country. So if you want to have an efficient data network, then you have to go through China. So I think this creates dependence on China when it comes to data security in the region, which there are concerns about right now. But again, that's outside the scope of this presentation. So this time, as I said, we'll focus on information warfare. So here, if you look at the title of the slide, I say cognitive/information warfare. And the reason is because as we delve into information warfare, there are I think that we are noticing more nuances to it. And for example, the lingos that China uses it's a little bit different from what the United States and Korea or Japanese experts use. So I think in this time we have to, in order to understand Chinese information warfare, we have to understand what the Chinese mean by information warfare. So and the Chinese I think that they prefer the term cognitive warfare, and then I think that's a better and apt description of what they're trying to do. So, let's before touching upon that, let's look at how the Chinese use information warfare for their strategies. So, we already know a little bit about, at least, maybe the audience doesn't, but then it's well known that the Chinese use three types of warfare, so they call it three warfares. So main non-kinetic warfare foreign policy strategy, and what they refer to as three warfares is public opinion warfare or media warfare. Essentially, this is a propaganda campaign stage on the media space. And there's the psychological warfare, which is better known, the idea of manipulating information to affect your adversary's mindset or perception of an issue. And there's lawfare. Lawfare is essentially fighting over in the court of international law. So for instance, international court of justice which adjudicates territorial disputes, or also the international organizations such as the United Nations, where the Chinese and Russians have increased their influence in the last couple of years. And the reason is because especially the Chinese believe by engaging in legal disputes and in the international arena, they can get a strategic upper hand over their opponents. So, but then again, let's focus on the psychological side of it. And so again, the difference between cognitive warfare and psychological warfare, in that the very simplest is that what you see on the slide. The psychological warfare attacks the consciousness, and the cognitive warfare attacks the subconscious. So it's a very subtle, not just very subtle, but a very different distinction. But then once again, it's very difficult to define what subconscious is and conscious is. It's a spectrum, obviously. So I think, and then you can understand cognitive warfare, including not just the conscious, but also the subconscious. So in practical terms, what it means is that unlike in an explicit psychological propaganda campaign, which tries to convince the audience about, change the perception or something with very explicit or direct messaging or information, with the cognitive warfare, what the what the player is trying, or what the actor tries to do, is to manipulate the entire informational environment. So it's not just about the messaging targeting you, it's more about changing the entire information surrounding you. So therefore, because in the modern media studies, we have come to understand that the way an individual perceives reality is not just through a direct explicit messaging, it's through by the absorption of information without you consciously engaging in that information consumption. So the cognitive warfare, in that sense, it's a much grander and a more comprehensive way of affecting your perception, because we are each affecting the entire information environment. So that's what the Chinese try to do, in our view. When they carry out misinformation campaigns, it's not only limited to just direct messaging about a piece of misinformation. It's about manipulating the media, manipulating important influencers in the political domain, in the media domain, and even the social media domain. And in this days and age, their efforts have gained much more power because they can really engage, essentially get into, exploit this multiplier effect of the cyberspace. So we know, and because of that reason, and we have to take this into consideration, the background, which is the Chinese options in the Northeast Asia is limited to, it's very much constrained to information space, that the Chinese disinformation and cognitive warfare activities are increasing. So in this case, I'm going to take the example of Korea because that's where I come from. So the Chinese, they have a more modus operandi when it comes to employing disinformation against the Korean government or Korean society. So oftentimes their messaging is characterized by not less about China itself, it's more about the United States and Japan. Of course, the Chinese are not going to sing praises to the Americans or the Japanese, it's to criticize them. So those stories are the main content of Chinese misinformation or disinformation campaigns. And while the Global Times and other China media, official media outlets, avoid criticizing their own government, they focus on criticizing foreign governments and other governments. And this is an important distinction because there's essentially I would say, a structure to the Chinese disinformation campaigns. And this facet of the Chinese official media comes to play in a very important way. So in terms of quantity, the Korean intelligence community has found out that the Chinese have been essentially setting up a number of fake news websites. So in November, they found 38. By December 2023, they found 178. Last year, in 2024, in the first half, I think the Korean intelligence agency found even more fake news websites. But again, these numbers don't really mean much because there's the duplicity, take that back. Redundancy to these websites, because the websites oftentimes just echo or like the copy each other, but also because those websites, they are very transient. So they are set up quickly and shut down. But there are others that actually remain in place. But most of them have been shut down after the news story broke out that the Korean government has awareness of what's going on. And then the way they produce content is by plagiarizing domestic media, so meaning Korean media for news stories. And that actually gives them two things. One is that it gives them credibility because you are using or plagiarizing high quality media content, but also because it allows you to curate the media content in a way that suits their need. And I think that this is it really shows what the kind of strategic intentions of the Chinese have, because they are essentially cherry picking media stories from the Korean media that are concerned, say friction between those American soldiers and the local Korean government, or historical standoff between Korea and Japan, which taken by itself just a news story, worthwhile news stories. But then if you curate them in a way that creates a context to it, then you can see that these media stories somehow, gives the impression to the audience that there's a very serious level of friction between United States, Japan on one hand, and Korea on the other. So these are the pictures of some of these fake websites. So what you see here is the title in Korean. It says that the US forces in Korea, they've been carrying out biological agent in their labs, in their bases. And the snapshot of the reporter, that actually comes from, not from this fake websites, obviously, it comes from MBC, which is a well-known, reputable Korean broadcaster. And this news story, the news story, I think is timestamped to 2022, but then the original story had come out a year before in 2021. So clearly they are recycling the news stories to suit their messaging. And again, I want you to pay attention to the names of these websites. There's one on top, it says Seoul Press, and then the one below says Busan Online. So again, they use this, whoever is behind this kind of websites, they are fake websites. They are using these names on purpose so that it tries to create the impression that these websites are Korean, not Chinese. So I would say the Chinese media operation is essentially is a combined arms operation, but in the media domain. So what the propaganda campaign does is that they combine the official media, the social media or troll farms, social media influencers, and fake news websites. So, and these multiple vectors essentially try to send this information, but this is not taking place at random. So the messaging of this information through multiple vectors is highly directed. So clearly there's somebody who's manipulating this, essentially a central actor who's in control of this media campaign. So the typical sequence of this kind of misinformation campaign is thus. So first, it starts with an official outlet editorializing news on an opinion column about Korea's foreign policy, very critical of the Korean government. And this theme is picked up by the online influencers in Chinese online platforms such as Bilibili and Weibo. And then this jumps the hoop and then spreads outside of the Chinese sphere and goes to the other parts of the world through the major online platforms such as YouTube and X. And then the fake news websites recycle these kind of stories and propagate these stories again and amplify them and allows it to jump to the Korean language sphere eventually. And then in the last year, some researchers have found that evidence of Chinese fake media accounts that are trying to sway public opinion by leaving comments or in the Korean web portals, the well-known portals such as Naver and Kakao, sorry, that's a new name. Yeah, so, and then we know how, so you might think, these are this exercise could be in vain, but in truth, having some impact because we have found examples of influencers who apparently is not being under the control of the Chinese state media, but nonetheless is picking up these kind of fake news stories and spread them online. So there's an example of an African investigative journalist who has a huge, important following on X. The last time it was counted, he had 410,000 followers. But so in his, I looked him up. I didn't put the name there, but then I looked him up online in his X account, and he's in fact a serious investigative journalist. But then I think because he's in the social media, I think he read an interesting tweet. He picked it up and he retweeted it. And because he has that kind of level of following, this fake news story about Korean government spread really fast. And the story in question was about the United States essentially helping the South Korean government in long time ago in carrying out civilian massacres in Jeju Island in 1948. So this was essentially manipulated or distorted story, but nonetheless, there are people out there who are well-meaning probably, but are picking up this kind of fake stories. So fake news campaigns, even though they are fake, especially to people who know what's going on in the region, but nonetheless has a huge impact outside with other people as well. So I want to emphasize here the other one important attribute of the China's cognitive operations, informational operations, and that is that they really emphasize the attribute of virality. Essentially, the Chinese information operations, they try to mimic a viral campaign or viral advertising campaigns. So they, just like in viral advertising campaigns, there's an extensive use of influencers and trolls. And then there's a central actor who direct this messaging to the best of their abilities. And then, that would say the most important part. And again, another important of the virality when it comes to Chinese influence operations is that they don't really put that much effort into propagating, exaggeration about China's capabilities or trying to rationalize China's behavior. What the messaging that's directed at Korea or Japan, at least in Northeast Asia, is really about with the intention to drive a wedge between either from Korea and Japan or between Korea and the United States. And also it tries to undermine the trust that the US allies and the public have on the United States, especially the US commitment to defend these countries. And this is a theme that we have seen over and over when it comes to Chinese influence operations against Taiwan. Yes. So that's China. Let's jump over to Russia. So how am I doing with time?
Have plenty of time.
Oh, it's all right. So I was going too fast then. So we can go back. So not really. So yeah, so let's look at the Russia's information campaign. So and then Russia, it's very interesting. I think Russia's motivation has been really determined by their strategic needs. So Russia was for a long time very well behaving in Northeast Asia because they didn't really have an issue or issue for conflict with anybody in that part of the world. And then for that reason alone, Russia wasn't engaged in any information campaign, except for one time. Back in 2018, Russia went after South Korea servers that was set up to handle the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. And the reason the Russians attacked the Olympic servers was because Russia as a country had been banned from participating in the Olympics because of doping scandal. So, and then they got access, so they went after Korea. But since then, until 2024, there's been long hiatus of Russian cyber attacks against South Korea. So that shows how's the level, or how high is not high, how low was the level of interest that Russia had in Northeast Asia. But after what happened in 2022, in February 2022, with the invasion of Ukraine, Russia's attitude towards Northeast Asia changed completely, especially when it came to Korea. So that's when Russia start to engage in the efforts to spread misinformation, especially against South Korea. And then the reason was very clear. Russia tried to prevent South Korea from helping Ukraine, either in weapons or economically or diplomatically. So, but then on the other hand, because Russia clearly was very busy, engaged in a very intense conflict against Ukraine, wasn't really able to pay too much attention. But we are seeing that as time goes by, Russia is putting more effort. So, for instance, there are two websites that are driving the misinformation campaign by Russia against Korea. One website is called South Front. This is apparently is managed by FSB, and then this is the first website that essentially publish stories criticizing South Korean government. After South Korean government start working very closely with the United States to implement export control against Russia. But then it start to evolve over time. And we are seeing more evolution of that message, especially with another website. And then another website is named Strategic Culture Foundation. And this one is managed by SVR, the foreign intelligence arm of the Russian intelligence community. And then the message apparently emanating from that website is more complex and more strategic. So it sends message about North Korea is supportive of Russia, and also it start having a strategic angle. Therefore, it start to criticize Korea for being allied with the United States. And then the last actor that popped up last year, in March of last year, is so-called Pravda Network. And this network is more dedicated to Korea because apparently they have a Korean language version. So clearly the Russians are kicking up their effort to spread misinformation. And also the scope of the message has transcended the narrow tactical goal of preventing Korea from helping Ukraine. to criticizing the overall US alliance system in the region and also the South Korea's role in it. And let's switch to North Korea. We cannot, discuss about Northeast Asia without talking about North Korea. So there you go. You have North Korea here. And you might be fascinated by what you want to hear from me about North Korea. Because North Korea had all the, advantages when it comes to, or when it came to information campaign against South Korea, because North Korea had essentially had owned the messaging in the Korean Peninsula, because North Korea claimed to have a better nationalistic credentials compared to the South. And the problem was for the South Koreans was that the many South Koreans, not many, but some South Koreans agreed with this North Korean attitude. And the reason why North Korea had a very strong messaging in the beginning was because they monopolized this anti-Japanese messaging. So North Korea didn't get along with Japan, but South Korea had good relations with Japan. We had a very, has a tight relationship when it comes to economy. When it comes to politics, clearly there are differences, but Korea and Japan had very strong economic ties during the Cold War, and the North Korean could take that as an example of how North Koreans are more anti-Japanese than Koreans. And this is the basis of Korean nationalistic messaging. And then they clearly had an upper hand. And another part of the North Korean messaging directed at South was message of unification. So North Koreans said, North Korean message of unification would be about that unification should involve only two Koreas, only the Korean people. And that had a huge sentimental appeal to the South Koreans, because obviously with just two Koreas, then things are going to be better. And then but that kind of unification would assume that there will be no alliance between South Korea and the United States. So that was very problematic. And then and those Koreans exploited it, because that messaging of dissolving the alliance between the United States and South Korea was very polarizing in the Korean society. It created a lot of polarization, also as a conflict, and the North Koreans really feasted on that messaging. But with the end of the Cold War, North Korea's messaging started to fail, and clearly with the collapse of the Eastern Bloc, and then also the collapse of the North Korean economy and the famine, clearly North Korea wasn't really the respectable actor that it claimed to be. And therefore, North Korea became very defensive when it comes to information campaigns. So in North Korea, instead of being this predator or like a hunter going after South Korea with very strong information campaigns, instead now has become the prey. So it became very vulnerable to outside information. So the regime in North Korea essentially gave up on controlling information. Sending information to South Korea that help with their strategic objectives. Instead, North Korean regime dedicated itself to stopping the inflow of information into the country. So in the process, they basically abandoned the propaganda campaign. And so they switched their effort, cyberspace, or cybersecurity from engaging in misinformation campaigns against the South. Instead, they put their resources into hacking, as well as committing financial crimes such as cryptocurrency theft, and also there are other types of financial crimes such as SWIFT hacking and so forth, and then ATM hacking. So basically turn their cybersecurity into money-making instrument. So, okay, let's go one more slide and come back to this one. So, but then North Koreans realized that South Korea being South Korea, and just like the Chinese, they saw that the South Korea being an open society and then being hyper-connected, afforded an asymmetric advantage to the North Koreans. So Kim Jong-un back in 2014 publicly stated that North Korea should take advantage of this so-called internet. So since then, North Korea tried to engage in information campaign, but then it wasn't that great, because again, they kept up with this previous posture of being defensive on the cyberspace. So instead of using the cyberspace to launch information warfare against the South, they instead engaged in regime promotion. So let's go to the previous slide. So this is one such example. So this is the picture of North Korean influencer, quote unquote. Her name is Song-ah. She's apparently 11 years old, and she's on YouTube, or used to be. And she's here talking about her review of Harry Potter. So clearly, this is less about tricking South Koreans into believing that North Korea is great. It's more about promoting the regime, and the regime, contrary to what people believe, it's not oppressive, it's open-minded, and they're open to Harry Potter. So, but then let's go back, but North Korea being North Korea, they defeated themselves by shutting down. Sorry, that was about YouTube. YouTube shut down the Song-ah, kicked out Song-ah from YouTube for good in 2023. That was very sad. But then also the North Koreans essentially gave up on their information campaign, their burgeoning information campaign, when Kim Jong-un abandoned the principle of unification in the not in the constitution, but then there's a policy back in 2023 and 2024. And in the process of abandoning or by declaring South Korea as the implacable enemy of North Korea, they in fact shut down their propaganda agency, the Unification Department, Unification Front Department. To shut it down, and the process shut down one of the two major propaganda outlets for North Korea. One is called 우리 민족끼리, which was set up a long time ago. I believe I don't even looked up when it was founded, but it's one of the oldest propaganda websites that North Korea managed. The server used to be in China. And they also shut down DPRK Today, which was more modernized version of 우리 민족끼리. And by the way, I'm sad that 우리 민족끼리 was shut down because 우리 민족끼리, in fact, mentioned my name back in 2015. He called me, 우리 민족끼리 called me an American stooge. So I'm a bona fide anti-communist, as well as North Korean, essentially, they have proven that I have right credentials to, criticize North Korea. So anyways, again, you can see that with this self-inflicted wound, North Korea shut down their own information campaign. So in a nutshell, we know that China has a lot of capabilities, Russia has some, and they are trying to improve on their information campaigns. North Korea, contrary to general perception, doesn't have any. So they don't even engage in information campaign against the South, at least in the cyberspace. So let's move on to still early.
We will just have a longer Q&A.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, so let's move on to the conclusion section. When it comes to information or hybrid threats in the framework of the information campaign in Northeast Asia, there's a huge disparity. Again, China is the most capable. China has own cyber platforms such as TikTok, Weibo, Bilibili, and so forth, and also has a lot of leverage on South Korea. Russia, not as much, but then Russia has the intention, and if it wants to, has the know-how to engage in a very serious and effective propaganda campaign against the South, especially in combination with their hacking and also there's cyber vandalism capabilities. North Korea, even though they had used to have a monopoly on messaging, especially political messaging in the Korean Peninsula, they gave that up for whatever reason, and therefore North Korea is probably the least capable informational threat in the Korean Peninsula at the moment. So, but then that's the status now. So it doesn't really preclude these three countries from working together in the future. And I think this is the most worrisome part of their capabilities. So as we have seen in the in the Russian slides, the Russian message has evolved over time, very quickly, in fact, not over time, but very quickly. The study with a very limited objectives of dissuading South Korea from helping Ukraine to essentially sending a strategic message about the region, spreading information or disinformation in order to undermine the trust that the US allies have on the United States, especially on the US commitment to defend the allies in the region. So this is very much in tune with what the Chinese are saying. The Chinese also send a very similar overture, exactly the same strategic messaging. As I mentioned before, the central tenet of their messaging against the South Korea is about, you should know about China. It's about the anti-Japanese sentiment and also as the anti-US sentiment. So you see essentially a convergence between the two messaging one from China, one from Russia. And we don't know whether this is taking place in coordination between these two countries. Maybe no, maybe yes. So, but then if they are seeing it, they are reading each other's work, chances that they realize that their works are converging. So, and then I think this is going to create opportunities for collaboration between China and Russia when it comes to information campaigning in the region. So, because after all, they share the common strategic objectives. Mm-hmm. So the question is whether they're going to join this dyad. And chances, yes. I mean, North Koreans, they died to be part of this so-called trilateral alliance between China, Russia, and them. It's in fact China who wants to give the perception that they are not part of this trilateral alliance that North Koreans are claiming to be real. So, but I think at least when it comes to information campaigns, the three are seeing eye to eye. Mm-hmm. And if North Koreans in the process of sharing or having know-how transfer from Russia, so far Russians have transferred to North Korea military technologies and some weapon systems. But if the North Koreans ask and Russians deliver, then Russians can deliver to North Korea know-how on how to conduct information campaigns against the South. And also, it doesn't mean that North Koreans have to set up an entire new system to engage in this kind of information campaign against the South, an updated version of an information campaign. They can just send their people to Russia and then work with the Russians alongside, work there alongside Russians in, say, Moscow or St. Petersburg. So I think this is probably the most worrisome aspect of the cooperation by these three countries. And I think that's, and I think it's not just the most worrisome aspect, but because it's so plausible and so feasible, I think it's something that we should be preparing for the future. So with that, I wrap up my presentation, and I'll be happy to answer any question you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's go and have some Q&As. Maybe I should open the floor?
Yeah, please.
Should we turn more towards South Korea again? Because what are the primary targets for disinformation campaigns in South Korea? And what, in your opinion, is their primary means of these disinformation campaigns?
So the primary audience is the Korean society, is the Korean public, clearly not the government. It's all about undermining the government, so people's trust in the government, and also affecting the political class. So the political opinion of the political elites in Korea. So we know the Korean political landscape is highly polarized. There's clearly some controversy regarding Korea's rapprochement with Japan, for instance. It's very controversial. And this is a political fault line that the outsiders can easily exploit. And it's a very cost-effective way of furthering polarization in Korea. So I think you could say it's the target for this influence or information campaigns are the Korean public, but also the Korean political class. And when it comes to vectors, well, I mentioned already, so it's already there that, the official media outlet tends to send or publicize the main official theme. And I think other, fake websites or influencers pick up the cue from there. And essentially, there are different variations, but nonetheless, they try to align. And I think it's just like, viral advertising campaign, these highly directed campaigns, even though they look random. So I think somebody or central actor is making sure that everybody sticks to the message.
Okay, just in regard to that, because with everything after the martial law declared on the 3rd of December and the increased polarization between the opposition with the DP and the PPP, have you seen an increase in these kind of disinformation campaigns since then? Because again, the polarization is being...
Well, the martial law was enforced in December 3rd, and then I've been here since January 1st, so I don't have enough time.
Okay, you might have to work.
It's a great cop-out.
We're looking forward to hear something more on that, but we have some amazing questions here.
Jacqueline has a question.
Yeah, Jacqueline has a question, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, because I have to leave, so I thought I'll just ask this question. Wonderful to know your perspective here, and I think this is quite educative to me, because I don't really focus on this area. A very fundamental but critical question in the current scenario. When we're talking about hybrid threat in Northeast Asia, how much it is really restricted or limited to Northeast Asia per se? The reason I'm asking because there is this authoritarian nexus that is emerging in Central Asia or in Eurasia, or having a closer linkages with Northeast Asian security dynamics. That also involves a country like Iran. So from South Korea's point of view, how much you see that the security scenario pertaining to hybrid threat is limited to Northeast Asia only? Or do you really see it goes beyond Northeast Asia involving Iran? And if yes, to what extent and what has been the discussion in South Korea?
So, the Chinese they're not giving seminars like illustrating what kind of hybrid strategies they are engaged in. But then we can get some clues from, for example, their media outlets. I think I looked up the Xinhua news agency website, and clearly they tailor their messaging according to what kind of targets they are going after. So I already described what kind of messaging the Chinese are focusing on when it comes to Northeast Asia. But when I look up the Xinhua webpage in other languages, it's quite different. It sounds different. It's less aggressive. It's all less negative about United States and Japan. They don't even mention the United States and Japan for other countries for obvious reasons. And then it's more about China. So it's really about promoting China. So I think because the Chinese use information campaign as part of their security and foreign policy strategy, but doesn't mean that everybody or everyone in the world are targets of Chinese hybrid strategies. What it means is that you can visualize it like this. So when they see in the regions or in issues that their fundamental interests are at stake, they engage in hybrid strategies. But when they are in other areas, they engage in normal diplomacy. So they engage in normal messaging and normal foreign policy statements. So, and then I think so we are seeing more pronounced difference between these two characteristics of Chinese foreign policy. So in fact, you can even speculate that in Northeast Asia, or let's say with countries where China is in conflict with, maybe the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs might not even be involved directly. Could be some other agency could be in charge. Clearly Chinese MOFA is involved, but then if their central objective in their policy towards our country is about achieving fundamental interests that are antagonistic with the country in question, then they're engaged in this kind of information campaign first and foremost.
But you don't really see a direct involvement of Iran in any form?
More
I'm talking about Iran.
Iran.
Yeah.
So I haven't looked up the case of Iran, but then when it comes to the Middle East, I think it's going to be about, I'm very sure that the messaging is going to be about undermining the United States.
Right.
So essentially, I think the common theme across the board, because China is in competition with the United States, and then he wants to drag the United States down from the spot, the pinnacle of being the most powerful country in the world or power in the world. They want to undermine the reputation as well as the trust that the countries have on the United States. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Panda. Let's go to a question online. We have one here. What are going to be the most prominent challenges in cyber domain for countries like Japan and ROK? How can they and should they work to counter these threats?
So again, I think there's a reason why the Chinese are focused on information domain for their hybrid strategies, unlike in South China Sea. Because in South China Sea, we see more traditional gray zone tactics, like the one that Russia was engaged in against Ukraine since 2014. There's a gradualism, there's ambiguity about who's behind these attacks, right? Attribution is a problem there, even though we're talking about conflict in the geospatial domain. We see proxies and so forth. But then we know that their behavior, the Chinese behavior switches when we're talking about Northeast Asia. So clearly the Chinese are thinking that this asymmetry in the information domain, also in politics, open societies against closed societies, shows that no matter what their targets do, try to fend off these threats, there's little we can do about it, or little Korea and Japan can do about it. Yeah. This is the dilemma of the open societies in general, because whenever we try to control these kind of threats, it bumps into, our freedoms, right? Freedom of expression, freedom of assembly sometimes, and so forth and so forth. So I think, but the best way, I mean, it's not going to be the most effective or immediate response to this kind of threats. It's going to be, it sounds very feeble, but it's going to be education. So what I really like about the way the United States handled I'm critical of what the United States did when it comes to Ukraine, but then at least when what they did on the eve of the invasion on Ukraine was that they disclosed all this highly sensitive intelligence about the Russian intentions, right? And that strategy has a name. It's a pre-bottom. So by disclosing information and you essentially give a warning to the other side that essentially telling the other side that you know exactly what you guys are trying to do. And second is that you should showcase your capability. And also when the Russians finally carried out with their invasion, it proved to everybody that the United States what the United States has been saying about Russia and Putin are credible. So this idea that you engage actively to name and shame the other side at the risk of being proven wrong or even getting into friction with, say, China in this case. I think it's going to be the only viable strategy that we have right now. But on the other hand, it takes political courage.
And that's the thing, isn't it? Let's move on to the next one. Thank you for a very enlightening talk. Is it possible to argue that language acts as a barrier to entry for cognitive campaigns? The wrong tone, word choice, and design of the material can make the recipient reject the attempt, such as the Harry Potter example. Can generative AI help the adversaries overcome this barrier?
So, this is a great question because the use of artificial intelligence by North Korea has been has been rumored for a while, but then I have my doubts about it. And again, so you have seen with the example of North Korea being very bad with information campaign, even giving up their prime assets such as their websites, 우리 민족끼리 and DPFK today, because Kim Jong-un had this crazy idea to abandon the principle of unification and shutting down decades of hard work to be influential among South Koreans. It shows that the North Koreans don't have a good idea of how to carry out an effective information campaign. So if people, the North Koreans don't know how to do it, then they clearly don't know how to leverage the power of artificial intelligence to further their aims. But that's North Korea. So let's look at China. And China has been very good. China, even though they don't really, they are very subtle and they don't want to come into open conflict. And then if you really can come into open conflict like the way they do in the South China Sea, it oftentimes contradicts the official messaging to Korea and Japan. So I think this is the reason why they are being very subtle with their behavior in the cyberspace. But nonetheless, we are seeing very high quality messaging come from China. You can just look at the websites. Websites are very believable. You have seen some examples. The Busan Online, I don't like the font or the design there. But then Seoul Press was actually pretty good. Looked a little bit outdated, but that can pass as a bona fide Korean website sometimes, at least. But then again, I would say this diversity in quality also applies to China to an extent. I don't think it's only the central government in China that's engaged in this kind of information warfare against Korea and Japan. I think the provincial governments are also engaged with this kind of information campaigns. And this is when and where you can see the clear difference in quality. So I think artificial intelligence, if the Chinese can leverage that well, can bridge this gap, and then therefore they can have not just quality, but quantity as well. And that's probably the future that we have to expect.
This one is more Japan focused. So what information narratives are used in Japanese media?
Yeah, well, I wish I could answer that, but I can. So I think from what I know, I have kept a message in Japan. Maybe that's why it prompted your question in this case. So from what I heard, I don't read Japanese, by the way. I don't speak Japanese either. So I'm really relying on third-party research and what they told me in conferences. it's a messaging very similar, trying to undermine the Japanese trust in the United States and U.S. commitment to defend Japan. And also, I think, and then the reason is because the reason why this messaging is similar, the message on Japan is similar to the one on Korea, is because Korea and Japan are the two societies in the world that happen to have the highest disapproval rate or unfavorability rating on China. I think Sweden is another country. So anyway, so I think this is the reason why the Chinese have realized that there's no point, or it's not cost effective for the Chinese to put money or resources on convincing these people, Korean or Japanese, that China is great, that China means well, because it's not going to work. So therefore, they go after the softer target or target that there's a lot of uncertainty about, which in this case is going to be the United States.
So the lesser evil kind of thing, maybe.
Or like more, they're looking for vulnerabilities. It's like, they're always, just like us, I guess. I'm lazy, so I'm always looking for the shortest path, the path of least resistance. So are the Chinese. So they're looking for a vulnerability that, that's most cost effective for them. It's human nature.
That's great. Let's move on to another one. It's a little bit longer, so be patient with me. At the moment, there's no official definition of cognitive warfare. Is the South Korean definition of cognitive warfare different from the one created by NATO? Does it empathize other aspects? And there's a little bit more text here. TC Hong and TV Hong, in their study of cognitive warfare in Taiwan, also included academic exchanges in the Chinese cognitive warfare initiatives. Do the South Korean scholars include those type of activities in their understanding of cognitive warfare?
So cognitive warfare is, as I said, it's much more comprehensive than psychological warfare. So, if you have a broader definition of anything, then cognitive warfare or information warfare, these are upper concept to on influence operations. So I think the examples of academic exchanges would be an example of influence operations, and this is extremely effective. Because especially in East Asia, because China has a lot of universities and China spends a lot of money in academic exchanges. And these are prime opportunities for the Chinese to host experts from many other countries. And I think that this is not only pertains to Northeast Asian or Asian countries, it applies to Europe, it applies to the United States. So, and then, in fact, it's not even Chinese in origin. I think the Russian or the Soviets also engage in this kind of operations, and I think about it in the United States as well, right? So academic exchanges are oftentimes the best vector for recruitment as well as increasing influence, because after these academics, professors, researchers return to their own countries, they come back with oftentimes with a very, very, very positive image of China, and if they keep that perception of China, that's going to affect their work and about. When they all add it up, that's going to affect the social perception of China as a country.
So we have one here. You mentioned that China aims to leverage anti-Japanese sentiments in South Korea as part of its hybrid warfare. How prevalent are these sentiments in South Korea, and what effects do they have on the mutual relationship between the countries?
So really, I think if you are a student of Korean history, it's only natural for Koreans not to like Japan that much. But then I think, but at the same time, the modern times, Koreans and the Japanese have some. Japan is not the same country that colonized Korea at the beginning of 20th century. It's a post-war Japan. It's a democratic state with its flaws, obviously, but. So but we also have flaws. So everybody does. So, so there's a lot more commonalities and differences between Korea and Japan. They are similarly rich, similarly advanced technologically and industrially. So there are a lot in common between these two countries. But then the thing is, Koreans' perception of history is very important. It's an old society, so history is a very important factor there. But when these historical issues remain in the historical domain, it's not really an issue. But the problem becomes when it pertains to politics, and the politics and the collective memory of recent history is a very powerful driver for politics everywhere now, right? Not just in Korea, but also in Europe, especially in Eastern Europe, as far as I know. So, and this is being oftentimes exploited by domestic politicians, often by both countries, in fact, not just in Korea, but also in Japan. The previous, for example, Abe government even though had a very clear eye about China and then the looming great power competition between the United States and China, they did take advantage of the Korean anti-Japanese sentiments in Korea for their own benefit in Japan, because a lot of Japanese people became disappointed and jaded with the Korean sentiment about their country, and that created huge backlash in the Japanese society, and the Abe administration took advantage of it politically. So, and this is the reason why we need to eliminate these kind of political factors in both countries by coordinating and closely, and also as improving relations.
I think we just have time for one last question. We have 5 minutes left. And here's a very interesting one. Given the increased cooperation between North Korea and Russia, do you think there's a potential for coordinated cyber attacks between the two nations? And has there been any evidence of such collaboration so far? And what might this mean for future hybrid threats?
So that's the thing. I think cyber hacking, for instance, the cyber security joint operation is a much higher bar than, say, information campaign. The reason is because I don't think Russians trust North Korean hackers at all. And so and then oftentimes Russians are the first victims of North Korean hacking. So we all know the famous story or the case of a ransomware called a WannaCry, right? WannaCry 2.0. The country that got most victimized by the ransomware attack wasn't the United Kingdom. It's in fact Russia. And because the Russians pirated all this, Windows OS, and then they were very vulnerable to this kind of attack by ransomware attacks. So Russia has this preposition to distrust North Korea, and North Koreans are rumored to have hacked into Russian defense firms, and then there are also energy companies, also as ministries to steal classify information as well as technology. And this is not a story that came out from New York Times or Washington Post or the lay media in the United States. In fact, this is a story that came out on Kommersant, a very reputable Russian business daily. So I think the Russians know that North Korean hackers are very dangerous, and they don't really care who the enemy is. They are very opportunistic. And then if they have carried out joint cyber operations, then I think the Russians are going to put at risk their own know-how, their own TTP, tactic, techniques, and procedures to North Koreans. And then North Koreans then can copy this to mask their attacks against, say, the United States, pretend that they are Russians instead of North Koreans. So it's a very dangerous ground. I think the Russians are going to avoid it. But on the other hand, information campaign, that's simple. This doesn't really require high level of thinking. So it's all about messaging, about content, and this is something that I think the two countries can work together very easily. And this is the reason why I think it's very feasible and plausible for North Koreans to acquire know-how from the Russians, because it's in their Russian interest to empower North Koreans in the information domain.
Okay, I think we can have a last small one. So we have to keep it short, but recently Japan has assumed an active cyber defense strategy. Is South Korea moving towards a similar posture?
Yeah, this is where I cannot say much because I don't know, first of all, and then this is a Korean government position, and then I'm affiliated with the Korean government indirectly, so I cannot really say much about it. But then again, what I can say is this. The Japanese have changed their cybersecurity posture, not because they wanted it. I mean, they wanted it, obviously, but it's being supported by the United States. It's a part of the U.S. Indo-Pacific cyber strategy. And South Korea and the United States have signed a framework for strategic cooperation in the cyber domain as well. So defending forward or for defense is a very central concept in the U.S. cybersecurity strategy. And if the Japanese are essentially implementing the cybersecurity concept of each key ally in the United States, maybe it should consider for the Koreans to do the same.
It's interesting to see what's going to happen with everything else. In a couple of months, we might have a new president in South Korea. So let's see and follow intensely and see what happens.
All right.
Thank you so much for Dr. Go for a very interesting lecture, and thank you for all of you for participating and asking so many amazing questions. If you want to rewatch it, it will be on YouTube, or if you haven't watched it, it's going to be available on YouTube. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Have a lovely day, evening. morning, whatever.